All right, everyone, welcome in. We are going to give it just another minute or two so that we can wait for some more participants to come in. It will just take, I'll play something else on a different thing. Kristie's saying it's not sounding good. So I'm going to pull up something else and just wait a couple minutes for people to come in. Meanwhile, if you can just put in the chat box, which you can find usually it's on the bottom of your screen, just type in the ages of your kids and what grade they're in. That would be helpful for us. We'll see you in a sec. I'm not sure why our music's not working, but that's okay. We are here with you. We'll pop in just a second. Great. So we have so far a 14-year-old, ninth grade, 5 years old in kindergarten, and 3 years old in pre-K, 9 years, grade 4, 7, grade 2, 5.5 years old. I remember the days where that half was extremely important, wasn't it? Sophomore daughter, living the teen dream of 15 and 18. Vanessa, you're right in the thick of it. My kid's going to be 7 on January 2022. He's currently in first grade. Awesome. Okay, we got a lot of different ages, and this is great because it is definitely relevant for all ages. Everybody has to, make decisions, and so we're going to talk about how we can best support our kids through this. Okay, 1 second while I'm getting everything straightened out here, then I'll hop in. Bonnie, can you let me know if you are seeing the correct slides at this point?
Yeah, I'm seeing the first intro slide.
The first slide, awesome, okay. All right, and then let me bring myself back on video here. Hi, everyone. I am Sheri Gazitt. I'm the CEO and founder of TeenWise, but I'm here tonight as a very proud member of the Balance in Mind team. We are lucky to be talking with Kristie from Youth Eastside Services tonight, and we're talking all about decision making. So welcome, Kristie. Glad you're here with us.
Thanks, Sheri. Hello, everybody.
So what we're going to do is, for those of you who maybe joined us last year, we did meditations at the beginning of our sessions. And we were talking about this as a team, saying how great that was to kind of take a deep breath and get grounded before we dove in, because probably most of you had kind of a chaotic day and you rushed to the computer and you're like, kind of still revved up. So we aren't going to do a full meditation, but we are going to do a quick breathing exercise to get ourselves kind of, our heart rate slowed down a little bit and just to settle into this moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a slide, which I think, Kristie, you said the blue psychedelic slide. So what we're going to do is we're going to just breathe, and it's 40 seconds. That's it. But it's going to make a difference, I promise you. And it kind of has this weird pattern of going in and out. And it's a little bit on the long side for that breath in, but if you can really work towards taking the breath all the way and then letting it out, then that can be really helpful. So I'm not going to play music or anything. We're just going to put this up on the screen. So just get settled in, get comfortable, and then let's breathe for 40 seconds. All right, I hope you'll join me.
Not seeing that slide yet, Sheri.
Okay, 1 sec. I'm over here breathing by myself, I guess.
I'm breathing. I think everybody else is breathing.
Good.
Here
I'm glad you're breathing. Okay, can you see it now?
I can, so I'm assuming others can.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm gonna hold on 1 sec. All right, here we go. There we go. Okay. It's amazing how long 40 seconds feels because
Mhm,
we're so not used to just being still for a moment.
mhm.
So I know for me, I
Fascinating.
can tell my heart rate kind of slowed down a little bit. I'm speaking a little bit slower. So that's awesome. Thanks to everyone for doing that with us. We'll see here if we can get our slides to advance. All right, here we go. Okay, so who's ready to talk about decision making? Kristie, are you all in?
I am all in on this. I've been thinking
Awesome,
about this for
awesome.
quite a while. It applies to everything, everything else we talk about.
Yes, for sure.
Mhm.
For us as parents and also for our kids, right? But what we're going to talk about tonight is why it's important that we allow our kids to make decisions starting at a young age. So let's just start with the basics. We're going to talk about why it's important to have your kids make decisions, and we're going to kind of break it down into a few different areas. So Kristie and I are just going to talk about each of these as we go through, but we welcome anybody to ask questions. You can do that. The best way is to put it in the Q&A box so it doesn't get lost. And also in the chat box, if you have comments or something kind of resonates with you, or if we ask you a question, then the chat box is the place to put that. Okay, so we're going to start out by talking about the brain and why, from a brain perspective, your kids need to start making decisions and at an early age. So, Kristie, why don't you jump in here and then I'll add stuff as we go along.
Well, great. So, in the last couple of decades, we've learned so much about the brain and the developing brain. And we now understand that our full brain and full functioning brain, particularly our prefrontal cortex, which is our decision-making capital, if you will, are not fully developed until in our early to mid 20s. But what isn't said in that is the very important point that the synapses, the connections in our brain, that ability is something that we actively can promote in our kids by having them do the work, so that when they are thinking through making decisions, they are actually developing literally the brain power. They are making those synaptic connections. They are getting, it's laying down tracks, if you will, in your brain. And there are certain times in kind of the development of the brain that the brain sort of goes, am I using this or am I not using this? And I'm going to sort of efficiently get rid of things that I'm not using. And so we want to do everything we can. And this is sort of, we've known this sort of unconsciously for a long time, because we always talk about early childhood enrichment, right? Well, this is part of that very idea, that it's really exposing your kids to as many positive activities. And here we're talking about how to do that, particularly for the parts of your brain that are making decisions, starting early on and then kind of expanding from there. Sheri?
Yeah, it's like everybody knows that it's easier for people to learn new languages if they start at an earlier age. It's the exact same concept. If we wait until college to let our kids start making decisions, their brains are not set up to do it. They literally have to learn a new skill if they haven't been making decisions all along.
Right. And
And
there's less
yeah,
flexibility, right? I mean,
exactly.
literally
Yeah.
less flexibility in the brain for doing it. It's not that you can't do it, but it's really suboptimal to do it that way, and just so much harder.
Right. There's some really amazing research that's starting to come out on decision making and having people hooked up to like the MRIs, functioning MRIs, and they're showing that the scientist that is watching their brain activity after they've been doing some decision making, the scientists can actually predict what decision the person is making based on the brain activity. So if that doesn't show you that it's important to practice healthy and positive decision making, I don't know what else would. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So what else about the brain? Like, why is decision making important? Anything else you can think of, Kristie?
Well, I'm just thinking about kind of just that facility of learning to do it building those pathways. You have the chance, I think, when you're thinking about this in terms of the brain, of doing something that we talk about a lot, which is that coming alongside your child. So no matter kind of what their age is, but that idea of side-by-side conversation and getting out of kind of a trap of frustration and criticism about mistakes and bad decisions, by especially when they're younger, but we'll talk a little bit later about how you can also do this, I think, with, older youth, is sort of setting the stage for them, right? So you help them with that first part, just like if you're, helping your child learn how to tie their shoe, you're more hands-on to begin with. So it's sort of like in decision making, it's like, oh, would you like to wear this or this to go outside? Or it's cold outside. Would you like to wear this jacket or this jacket? You making that choice for the young child about what is appropriate. But you're giving them choices within that. And so really you can think about it as doing these building blocks and then using the opportunities, because you structured the choice, particularly the younger they are, in such a way that the mistake is not going to be life-threatening, and the mistake can be an opportunity. So if they found, wow, I picked the coat that was a little lighter and I'm really cold, and you can think, oh, wow, what choice would you make differently next time? And you can help them kind of think through that, which is that recovery from mistakes, which we're finding kids have been so sensitized to, in the sort of the last several years, that we've had this real uptick in that kind of anxiety, depression, and even sometimes with suicidality, about feeling like there's no room for me to make a mistake. It's just all or nothing. And this is like, no, you can recover from making mistakes. And that's part of the process. And that's all about kind of helping to develop the brain. And it's just a great way to think about it, because I think it helps us as parents get out of like our fear-based controlling or our, fear-based reactivity and like, and that, and sort of brings it back where actually we have a little bit more power in the situation of helping our children learn.
Right, for sure. Yeah, another thing about the brain and decision making is when our kids feel like they are able to make some decisions, it actually reduces their stress. It's feeling like they have some autonomy. And as Kristie pointed out, when they're younger, you're having them choose from two things, and as they get older, we still give them choices within a certain arena, right? But when our older kids are able to choose, let's say the classes they take for that school year, and let's say the class is hard, they still feel less stressed because they made the choice to do it versus feeling like somebody else made the choice.
I'm going to also suggest that there's probably less friction with their parents.
For sure.
And I also think that you can do this coming alongside, work with them in terms of making some of those difficult decisions too, because this doesn't, there aren't extremes here. There isn't like, oh, now all of a sudden your kids, whatever age, they get to make every single decision for themselves. That would create havoc and is not appropriate. Kids at different ages definitely need kind of structure and limits, and there are guidelines and there are rules and expectations and all of that. But at the same time, it's not like, no, you can't make any decisions whatsoever, or I'm totally hands off as a parent, or I'm totally hands on. This is kind of finding some of those middle grounds and making that appropriate for your individual child and the age and developmental level that they're at. So for example, middle school, high school, some of those conversations are a little bit like, hey, what are you thinking about taking? Oh, talk to me a little bit about that, because, you've shared that your goals are such and so. And how does that fit in with those? I mean, helping them to think through it rather than criticizing their choice or thinking it through for them or negating theirs. You want to be helping them with that process and having that kind of conversation with more of those open-ended questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that situation, if they come and say, I'm going to take 5 AP classes, and you say, that's not a good idea, they may be entrenched in that just because you said no.
Right.
So,
The same thing as like, oh, I'm going to take all of the really the easiest classes.
right.
And then it might be like, okay, well, saying, well, that's really dumb. You're just shutting down everything, right? But if you say, talk to me about that, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, what are the advantages of that? Because there are some advantages to taking all easy classes, and then probably some advantages to taking all hard classes.
Mhm.
And then might some of the disadvantages be? What do you think it's going to feel like, a couple of weeks into the quarter? What about the semester? Gosh, I know that, you're really enjoying playing soccer. Yeah, and I love this. Somebody just put in that teens, well, not just teens, this starts at age about 3 too, I think, maybe some
Yes.
at 2 with I'm going to do the opposite of what you
Right.
say. And it kind of continues, because I've had a situation with my daughter. It wasn't me, it was actually her boss, who I think said a couple of things to her that resulted in her doing exactly the opposite. It's very intriguing. She's 25. But
That's funny.
that's absolutely right. And some of this, again, it's not because you have a bad or an obstinate child, or you're not doing the greatest parenting. A lot of this is part of development. So when a child is saying no to what you tell them to do and exerting that pressure, they're working on defining themselves, right? And how much better is it if you structure some of the choices so that they can have that experience by saying, oh, are you choosing this one or this one? Rather than saying, you will choose this one. No, I won't. And all of a sudden, the tantrum is kind of on, kind of thing. Or
Right.
our teen is out when they're, well, I've seen plenty of adults out when it's freezing cold in their shorts, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And the last thing I would say about the brain and why it's important to have our kids make decisions is that our brains and our psyche, if you will, likes patterns and stories. So when a brain is making a decision, it's like a computer. It goes in and looks at all the data and turns all the data and says, oh, I see a familiar pattern here. I'm going to make this decision. So if they don't have any patterns of decision making, then it's like starting from a blank slate.
Right.
And I think we can all agree as parents, we want to get in there and have our little neural pathways in the brains of our kids. We don't want it to be at college where they're finally trying to make decisions on their own.
Yeah, I saw a couple of things in the chat. I was just chuckling a little bit because one was kind of like in your face all the time. And then the other one was sort of a little bit the opposite of, what about a child who doesn't feel like they have any choices? And again, I know we're going to talk about kind of a decision-making model that addresses that later, but I think that is part of decision-making. You're absolutely right, is helping somebody who doesn't identify more than one choice to really expand their thinking about that, and kind of having, well, let's have kind of like a little crazy brainstorm. And so I think it is trying to elicit from them first, and then sometimes maybe throwing out something, and depending on your child, I mean, you could use irreverence, and it could be some kind of joking, silly thing, and they'd be like, oh, yeah, right. Like, okay, well, what else then? Or it could be kind of serious, like, well, what about this or that, and let's kind of like work with some of those, just work with them for a while. Let's play around with them. Wonder if you did this, wonder if you did that. Just really kind of thinking of ways to create opportunities to see choices, to see kind of differences laid out. I mean, maybe that is even in terms of like literally like, here's a bunch of different colors. Which one would you like to do X with? Or getting their brain to really literally concretely experience these things are different from one another, and then start to think through that process. If I went this way, what would happen? What would be the impacts of that? And then in the in your face thing, then I think it is really, it's sort of like at that age, it's like, okay, you want to pick your battles, right? So you want to decide what are kind of some of the areas that are really challenging and are the most important to kind of go to bat around. And then there is sort of a process of decision making, but there's a way to kind of do it in terms of a context of a family meeting, that where you would be like, okay, So we've been getting into a lot of tussles around this or that. So we want to talk that through. So in these situations, these are kind of the choices, or what choices might you make around this situation, even list them out and then say, okay, what do you think the reasonable kinds of consequences are if you make those kind of choices? What's going to happen? And so something like could be around curfew, and you as a parent would say, well, your curfew is going to be 10 p.m. Sorry, that's just what it is for your age, and we have reasons for that. And I think it's always good to say, and if you make really good choices, we can have a conversation in 5 months or so to talk about making that different. But then saying, so you could choose to not do that, and then what do you think are some reasonable consequences for that? What are some things you think are going to happen? Like, we're not going to trust you, we're not going to be willing to make it later, we're probably going to have some kind of a disciplinary consequence. What do you think? What do you think that should even be? And sometimes it'll be like, well, I think I shouldn't be allowed to stay out past 8 for 3 days if I mess up on that or something. So you're creating the process, which is what is activating the brain to physiologically learn these things and the patterns that Sheri is talking about. So you're introducing a different pattern than the knocking heads, because there are for sure some kids who that's their style, right?
Yes, for sure. So really it boils down to collaboration and not control. We're letting go of some of the control for us as parents. Yes, it's hard sometimes, but when we do that, it decreases our anxiety actually and our stress, and allows us to connect with our kids better and help them to develop a brain that knows how to make decisions. Okay, so let's talk about resilience. We've touched on this a little bit already, Kristie, but how does allowing our kids to make decisions help to build resilience?
Well, again, I'm going to think about resilience. I think about like, well, I have my feet on the ground, but I'm flexible. So something comes at me, I'm going to be able to respond. So when we mentioned before about having the patterning include responding and recovering from a mistake or a bad experience. And when we're doing that, that is again building resilience, because that is in essence being able to flexibly come through difficulties, and with sort of an implied and learning something from that. Now, we don't want our kids to learn via the hardest lessons, but we also don't want to protect them from every hard and difficult thing, emotion and experience and mistake either, because they will not develop it.
Yeah.
It really is intimately tied.
Go ahead. So I was going to say that resilience a lot of times refers to like the emotional piece of the failure. So that it's not just about like if you fall down in a marathon and then you get up. You've seen the videos where people are coming across the finish line with scraped knees and stuff. So there's the physical piece of it, but there's also an emotional piece. And when we let our kids make decisions, they are inevitably going to make bad ones at some point, and they're going to have uncomfortable feelings, and they have the opportunity to learn that that's okay, that they aren't always going to feel that way. They'll get through it. They have the strength to get through it, and that's okay.
Yeah. And, there's a comment in here about a child who, and I think anxious children tend to be this way. I mean, even when they're adolescents and beyond, that sort of are avoidant of making decisions. Yeah. So it's not that they necessarily don't think there are choices. They just assume ahead of time they're going to make a bad choice. And so they just want to be hands off and that. And I think that takes a little bit, a sort of a different kind of thinking through, for sure. But I think that you still, maybe it might be that you want to come at that with some validation and helping them to remember times when it did go well, and that the times when things didn't go so well, but they were resilient and got through it, maybe a little bit of like, how did you do that? What do you think kind of allowed you to do that? What was helpful? How could you bring that into this situation? And then maybe helping them to identify again some of the choices that could be, and say, kind of play along with me here. It's not so much that you pick the right choice, because sometimes it's like making something out of clay, right? I mean, you have to start it. You can't just all of a sudden, like, you take your lump of clay and you set it down and it just becomes this beautiful bowl. You have to mess around with it. And if you watch potters, how many times does that thing just kind of implode? Many times, oftentimes, even with very, very talented people, it's part of that process of getting it there. You can't possibly write anything without first putting words on the page. And that implies that they're not going to be there perfectly to begin with. And so, really gently and understandingly of kind of that anxiety and that fear of messing up, but encouraging that. And so at the same time, then you have to be accepting of less than perfect performance or less than perfect, choices, and really, really speak to that, how important it is to make mistakes and learn from mistakes. And particularly when you're younger and the consequences, well, I say that, but I think young people feel like their consequences are quite dire. And sometimes they need some help kind of figuring out that they're not as dire as they think they are. And part of that, again, goes back to development in the brain. So teens are actually, and mostly teens, but to a degree, younger children, they're thinking with the emotional part of their brain. And so it's all about like how I feel, how they feel, what it's going to be like. It's drama. I mean, it's like they come by that honestly, the way their brain is functioning. And so things will feel like a big, big thing to them. And you don't want to diminish that. You want to hear that and you want to validate their feelings. And then you want to come alongside of them and you want to practice these principles of this decision making and helping them to think that through, including that learning from mistakes and how important that is, and how really, I don't think anybody who's ever accomplished anything great in the world, let alone just us ordinary folks, has gotten there without making many, many mistakes.
Nope, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that has come up a lot in recent years is the kids who, again, haven't had a lot of decision-making skills, or opportunities. So then they haven't had a lot of opportunities for failure. And then they get to college and they fail and they haven't had an opportunity to build this resilience. So the slightest speed bump sends them into emotional turmoil, and it feels like a huge deal. And luckily, there's a lot of mental health resources on campus now. But I think the last thing I read was 40% plus of kids in college are seeing a therapist, which on one hand, I'm like, yay, that's great. But it's also like, that many people need it. And this is part of the reason.
That's taking that downstream. For sure, you want to provide resources when somebody has those needs as best that you can. But the more that we can, and that's why I'm really thrilled there's people here with little ones, parenting little ones, that if we make these efforts and we start early on, and we've talked about it and we've thought it through as parents, because really this is, well, it's not taught, right? I didn't have a class in parenting. And you think, well, maybe once you are a parent and then you're like, oh my goodness, there really should be classes on this, then maybe you go find one. And I've talked a lot before about it's like there's just a lot of that kind of thinking through, and a lot of kind of efforts and things that you wouldn't necessarily assume were going to be part of parenting. So the more that we can think about that and work on these things upstream, the better we're all going to be, and the better outcomes we're going to have for our kids.
For sure. Which brings us to the next concept of empowerment, of how allowing our kids to make decisions really empowers them and makes them feel like they do have some control. Like the one person is saying that their child feels like they don't have a lot of choices. There's various reasons that they may feel like that, but when we can really let them know, yes, you do, then they feel empowered to make that choice.
Right. And this is not like, so this is not surrendering power and giving power over to the one who is challenging the boundaries every day. So you see how it takes this kind of, really kind of intense thought sometimes about, how's this going to work with my particular child and their
Right.
tendencies? You can't just take it from what we say or from a book. You do have to really work at it through the lens of knowing your child and their quirks. Right. And then at the same time, working to be more skillful yourself in terms of like that, keeping your own kind of stress and fear, under control so that it doesn't inform kind of what you're saying. And that you're inviting your child more and more into that process of making a good decision, even though that could look different. Because that inviting them, and I want to rephrase that. So it's not so much inviting them into the process of making a good decision, it's inviting them into the process, the good process of making decisions. So that's what we want, is we want the process, them learning the process of coming to decisions and weighing their options.
Mm-hmm. And I think like one of the things we haven't really touched on specifically is the idea that we can give our kids decisions and then we can take those kind of choices away, depending on the circumstance, right? One thing that kind of in my mind stands out is if you give your kid a cell phone, for instance, and you set certain rules and they break those rules, then you can be like, oh, okay, let's take some of those choices back, roll that back a little bit, and we'll try again. And you can do that without shaming your kid or making them feel bad about it. It's just a learning process. And if our kids, for instance, also are struggling with substance abuse, or if they're extremely depressed, then the choices may look a lot different because we do have to set rules and guidelines for
Absolutely.
our kids.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said at the beginning, this is not about turning all the decisions over to your kids or giving them none. It's about finding that place in the middle there and then knowing your kid and being sort of flexible and adjustable. And it's like, where can they have some choice so that they can learn the process and they can have this feeling of empowerment and they can learn to recover from mistakes. So for example, you would never have like, you could make a choice to drive under the influence, right? That's just that's a no-go. It's like, yeah, no, if you want to drive, then, our expectation is that you will not be using substances. You will not be under the influence. We might do X, Y, or Z to kind of see that that's the case. And then when you're demonstrating responsible behavior, then you can do that. Then let's talk about kind of the choices you might need to make, while you're doing that, about having friends in the car and what does the law say? And so then there's that kind of whole process after that.
Right. And the other thing is, if we are thinking about this in terms of empowering our kids, we want to make sure that we're not setting them up for failure either, right? So if you are, I'm going to go with a teen example. If you're going out of town and you're letting your teens stay at home by themselves, let's say they're 17 or something, you don't want to leave all your liquor out and, all like for anybody to access and then say, sure, you can have your friends over, have 10 people over, I don't mind. I mean, you're just setting it up for some very poor choices, not just for your kid, but for others. So
that's
you have
right.
to think about the situation.
And that goes again to that realistic expectations is what I wanted to say. And then also sort of remembering that part of making rational decisions, that decision making by the brain is not fully developed yet. So they're a little handicapped to begin with. So the more that you can assist in setting them up for success, the better.
Right. So Kristie, we are about at 7:40. So we're going to run through self-mastery, and then we are going to talk about the process that you can teach your kids to make decisions. You can use it for yourself too. It works for anybody. So let's just dive into self-mastery a little bit. You kind of talked a little about this when we were talking about resilience. So to be clear on what self-mastery is, it's the concept that you don't know everything, but you have, it's like self-esteem, and that you feel like you can master what comes your way. So you're building the process. So maybe you don't know how to, what's an example here? Oh, here's a weird one. So I was coming home yesterday and the road that I normally take was closed, right? I haven't learned about this before. It's not like I had a plan, but I felt confident that I could figure out how to get home otherwise. So that's kind of an idea of self-mastery.
Yeah. And the way that you get self-mastery is not by having other people do things for you. It is by doing them yourself. And the kind of that building blocks comes to mind. It's little by little by little, which is why, the earlier you start, the better. But if you haven't, then I think it's introducing this little by little with your children. So once we talk about kind of this process that we're suggesting, which I think all good decision-making processes are similar to each other, and we just kind of picked one that we felt was pretty universal, but it's bringing this in now and figuring out how you can introduce that and kind of have your child experiencing it step by step if they haven't been doing a lot of it, and maybe even have a conversation with them about that. And I was even thinking about, there's a lot of power sometimes, and again, it depends on the relationship that you have with your child, but in saying, oops, you know what? I think I really kind of goofed. I did not do a good job setting you up for success in that situation. Let's talk about what could set you up for some more success next time around. That what could you kind of do, and what could we do as parents to support you in that? And again, this is part of modeling that process of recovering from mistakes, learning how to, do the good process of making decisions, not having to do it all on your own, but ultimately learning how to do it yourself.
Right. Yeah. And it's never too late. If your kids are 14, 15, 16, 20, right, it's not too late. So nope. I don't want you to think if your kids are older, I haven't been doing this, I need to do it, but it's too late. It's not. You can always start wherever you are, right?
Exactly. But think about kind of how to start with it small and rolling it out kind of, and sort of they're getting the flavor of that and you working with them around it, rather than just like, okay, now you got to make your own decisions.
Right.
Here you go.
Yeah, don't just open the floodgates. That may overwhelm them a little bit. All right. So I have a question for those of you who have joined us tonight. I want to know if, perhaps you haven't allowed your kids to make as many decisions as they could have. And I'm wondering if that's because it's just easier sometimes for you to do it. It's just, if you even think about something
for
like
honesty here, huh?
Yeah, if you are like making dinner, how impatient can you be when you're watching them burn things or do it differently than you do? Just give me a thumbs up or something, or share a situation of, if you can think of a moment where you're like, oh, just let me do it. Just so we can, like you said, keep it real, Kristie. Okay, so
I'm a thumbs up on that, because it's not even just about decision making, right? That's about doing all kinds of things. And so, yes.
Yeah. Or that fear, like, oh, I don't want them to do it because they might blow up the house or whatever. Fill in the blank.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna skip growth mindset so that we can get to the decision making here. Okay.
And I'm just laughing about yes, exactly, without streaks here and there. So sometimes it's like, okay, what can we let go of, right? Because they really, the value of them learning sometimes, if we think about it, really outweighs the consequence. So we have to think about that. Does it really matter that the flour's all over the kitchen? Could you figure out a fun way to get it cleaned up together? Or, Yeah,
That's a good one. The baking, yes.
And the vacuuming and
I
all
do the
those, yes.
vacuuming, yes. With that
Oh,
garbage
pink
can in
socks are
there.
cool. All right, I love it. Yes.
Yes, and Harmony, maybe
Oh.
you can just let the streaks, be there, something for you to work on. Oh, the pink socks, yeah. I admit I've done the pink socks several times,
Oh,
especially when I
yes.
was first starting to do laundry. Okay, so we are going to, oh, won't pick up the poop. It's horrible. Yes, I
Yeah,
understand that.
that needs a
I
little
get that.
discussion about kind of like if yeah, if we're gonna have a dog, then yeah, I hear you
Yeah.
though.
Okay, Harmony, you stare at the streaks. I get it. Maybe she can vacuum and then you can walk around on, or he, so that you can get those streaks away. But there's other things in vacuuming. Don't
Well,
worry.
and I know we want to get to this, but I just had to say,
Mhm.
sometimes those things have to do with, it looks like they don't want to do it, but sometimes we do need to check for understanding about the actual task. I mean, I had this conversation with a colleague recently about, and this was about kind of spouses, and it was like, sort of like, oh, will you clean the kitchen? And then, supposedly the kitchen was cleaned. They said they cleaned the kitchen, but their idea of cleaning the kitchen was not the same. So it felt
Yeah.
like, we're getting in an argument now because you didn't clean the kitchen. Well, what did you mean by clean the kitchen? Well, I meant do the dishes in the sink and put them away, wipe down all the surfaces,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like, oh, that's what that means. And I think certain age kids really want fairness too. So
Yeah.
you might have to be having a conversation about kind of like, well, everybody does different things and different chores and that, and I'm not feeling like it's just left upon them. And then there's also the staggering things like, well, you can do X and so once this is done.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard for us to let go of how we think it needs to be done or that it needs to be perfect. And so that's why we don't allow those decisions to be made or responsibilities handed over. But so that's an I problem. We have to
Right.
work on it from our point of view.
And
too.
I think we can be really gentle with ourselves about it and not judgmental, because we're all like, I mean, especially like, there's all kinds of situations from doing, working and parenting, or
Yeah.
just all kinds of complications in life, many different children doing different things. And yeah,
Right.
it's rough.
Sure. It is. Parenting is not easy. It's fun, but it's not easy. All right, Kristie. So let's get into, how do you teach decision making? First and foremost, you have to give them the opportunities to make decisions. But so we're going to show you a method called SODAS, and we added an extra S. So I was looking at the spelling now, it's SODAS, but we'll get through it. And so basically, not every decision requires you to kind of think through this process. So this is kind of for some of the bigger stuff, but it is a good way to teach about making decisions, especially bigger ones. So SODA stands for situation, options, disadvantages, advantages. A lot of people refer to them as pros and cons, and then solutions. And then we have added on to it self-reflection at the end of that, because it's important that once you make your choice and do it, you also have to talk about what happened, right? So the first piece here is situation. And we're going to take a scenario and we're going to walk through this. So if anybody wants to put in a possible scenario, maybe a decision-making scenario, we can go through that, or we have a couple that we've made up as well. So let's just give that a second to see if anybody.
So one that someone's child would have.
Right, someone's child, yeah. Not us as adults, but as children, doesn't matter what age. I'll give you a second to think about that, everybody. And meanwhile, I'm going to look, because I know I had a couple of them. Are you seeing my slides still, or did that just turn it off?
Situation slide is on.
Okay, so you're seeing full-blown slide.
All
right, my guess is it won't. There we go. Okay, let's see.
How many honors classes to register for?
Yeah, let's do that one. Yeah, and Janine, I hope I'm saying your name right. When you said that earlier about they feel like they don't have any choices, I kind of thought this might be one of the scenarios there, because I hear from so many teens when I say, why are you taking so many hard classes? They say, I don't have a choice. I have to, because of all the kind of pressures
that they're feeling, that, sometimes they attribute to certain places. And then I think it's helping them think through it. They realize, well, that's actually not true. I mean, it's not,
Yeah.
maybe you aren't really insisting that they do it. They can have a future without doing that. They could get into a good college without it. So, yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
so we're gonna
that's the
walk through
situation.
it. Yeah, we're gonna walk through this, and then we'll go back if we have time and walk through it quickly from a younger kid's perspective. Okay, so Kristie, situation. What do we need to think about in this situation?
Well, let's see. We're starting with our disadvantages of, well, thinking about kind of, first you're going for your options about, so what are the options? Well, you could take all the AP classes. You could take 4, 3, 2, 1. What else would you take? So really kind of putting that out there. And I see like other ones, a lot of folks are looking at the video games versus kind of homework or chores versus family. So we might want to walk through one of those because I think it's a little bit different. So here it's really generating what are the options. So right away we're saying there are options. It isn't just you have to take the 5 AP classes, and you could kind of listen and validate a little bit along the way of why is it, what's going on that you think you need to take all of those, and be listening so that later in the conversation you can kind of bring that back up. So then you want to identify kind of maybe the options that seem to resonate best. So maybe it is, they want to look at taking 4 AP classes versus 2. So let's just pick that.
Okay.
And so our next place we're going is our D, or disadvantages. So what are the disadvantages of the 2 different options? And here you could map that out using what they call kind of a T map. So there's the disadvantages on one side and then the advantages on the other.
And so I'm going to put this to the people who are here. What are the disadvantages of taking 4 APs? Let's just say that's the choice we're looking at. What are some of the disadvantages there? We'll get some ideas from you. And then the next is advantages.
Advantages, yep. And so likewise, people could be thinking that and putting that in the chat. That would be great. So again, it's like, I can think of some things that, right off the top of my head, there's advantages and disadvantages absolutely to both of those, as there are to most things, right? So it's really trying to make as much of a, So now we're going back to disadvantages, less time for extracurriculars, lots and lots of homework, getting really tired, getting burnt out. I mean, so you've got to have a list there. Then if you're going to move over to the advantages, you want to get those all listed. And the idea is to kind of both, I think, see that there are advantages and disadvantages, and then to think through, because now we're bringing in kind of like, well, what is most important to you? And then what is important to your health? What's important? I mean, life is more than just kind of grades and academics. So if we're looking for some balance in there, so we're talking here about kind of balance and honoring kind of our values and what's important, to them and to your family, and who all is impacted. Maybe it's not all about kind of the impact on them, because maybe there are real impacts on others with one choice or the other, right? And those things all need to kind of be considered as well, so that you're really doing kind of due diligence. You're really fleshing this out. That's the mapping in the brain, and that process of looking at options and then thinking about what are the consequences to options, because all of them have impacts both on you and on others.
Right.
And then you kind of go, okay, how did that come out? I mean, it might be that sometimes it's really obvious that there's way more disadvantages to this one and way more advantages to this one. So it's, and then it resonates kind of with the feeling inside. So, yep, that's what I'm going to do. And then for some, it might still, be back and forth. And it might take some more like, well, what is really most important here? Or let's do some more visualizing of what this would look like. Or have you ever been in a situation like this before? So you're bringing some kind of more enhanced things to it if it's a little bit more evenly balanced. And then you come up with a solution. And when you come up with a solution, this is our first S, right? Then you test it out. And I think you want to think about it in that way and bring that into the solution. It's not necessarily that things are solved right then and there. This is why we went for the reflection part, because I think many people will be familiar from not only kind of their personal lives, but from their work, right? It's like, maybe you're on a brainstorming, a problem solving team, you come up with a solution to something, well, you test it out, right? And you say, this is what we want to have happen. And if it doesn't, then we're going to take that feedback and we're going to make adjustments. And it might not mean that it was a totally wrong decision, but it might mean that it needs to be adjusted, improved, or something needs to be changed about it.
Yeah, so there's some decisions that, I'm talking to teens, they feel like it is a permanent decision. And of course there are some that are, but so many decisions that they really struggle with can be changed. So let's say they do take 4 AP classes and they realize quickly it's too much, then they can work to get out of 2 of those or all of them.
Well, they could, and they could also accept not getting 100% on every single assignment.
Yep.
It's like, okay, how could you make this work?
Yeah.
But making those adjustments, and again, that's part of that resilience. It's part of that kind of recovery process. It's the whole package. And so I think that you want that embedded in the solution, the idea that you're going to come back and you're going to review it. And then it is part of the self-reflection, which is kind of the next step there. And are there other things you wanted to say about the reflection part, Sheri?
Yeah, I think for us, one of the things that you did as you went through those steps is you weren't dictating what the answers were. You were alongside, as we put it, helping with the process. So the same with self-reflection. So this is not an opportunity for you to say, see, I told you so. It's not an opportunity to say you did it all wrong or what were you thinking. This is an opportunity to help you, to have them reflect on what they felt, what they thought was good about it, what wasn't good about it. And then this is that piece where their brain is learning how to make a healthier decision. So, the way that the solution made them feel in the end. So let's say, back to the curfew, they did decide to stay out an hour late. They felt anxious because they weren't going home. They were upset when they came home because they knew they disappointed their parents. Take
their
those
parents
feelings.
Are upset with them.
Yes,
They're less
exactly.
trusting. Yeah.
Exactly. So,
right.
But you can do all of that without making them feel bad about it.
Right. Because then it's like,
role.
Okay, so what do we need to change then?
Yes.
What can you do differently next time, or what would you do differently next time, and how would that work out? Yeah.
Right.
I wanted to make a quick observation about the situations that people put forward about, like, either finishing your homework and doing it well, or going out to play with your friends, or playing video games, or doing your homework. And I guess what I'd like to suggest is that in both of those situations, that's kind of setting that up for a little bit for a conflict. Is sort of this either or. And so I think I might back up and I might think about, like, okay, so maybe we could have that conversation about what are sort of the expectations or responsibilities that the child has. And so say, okay, so one of those is getting your homework done or getting these chores done. And you can even say, like, everybody in the family kind of has some of this stuff, right? Now we have impulsivity kind of here too. You guys kind of sometimes are really demanding. It's hard, these things. But to continue with this one where, so you would say, so in the course of a week, everybody in the family wants to have fun, wants to relax, needs to get a good night's sleep, needs to eat. Parents have work and chores, kids have school and chores and homework, and parents have, what other kind of responsibilities. So it's a challenge for everybody to figure out how to do all these things together. And then I would sort of work to build up like, okay, here's a plan for how people are going to do this. And then as you do that, then you get to that place where, oh, it was kind of your plan or part of your plan, and you kind of come up with that mutually with some guidance depending, on kind of what's going on. But if the plan is that you're going to do most of your homework right away after school because you want to have this time then to go and meet, your friend or do video games or do whatever it is. Well, what happens if you don't do it? Well, it's like, then you're starting to look through, okay, what's the advantage or the disadvantage of that choice? So it's backing it off of the choice being between like what you want them to do, their homework, and what they want to do, play with their friend. That you're in a tug of war or a head-to-head thing there. So you want to defuse that to begin with and step back and talk about the general situation and then see, when does that conflict come up? And then how might you think that through as a decision?
Yeah. And also don't have these conversations in the middle of the emotional blow up. Do it when everybody's calm, or else there's no logic in the situation. So when everybody's just kind of in a calm moment, that's when you talk through these things.
Right.
Also, here's the other thing. We're almost out of time, but the other thing is that it's important. Let's say your kid does choose to do 3 hours of video games and no homework, that they have to live with the natural consequence of not turning it in at school and possibly failing or getting a lower grade, if they turn it in later.
And you don't rescue them from that.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's an important part of the decision-making process, that they learn those natural consequences.
Yeah. So I do want to address this impulsive choices that here it says that little kids make, but we also know that older kids can make those impulsive choices too. And whether it's like, reaching out and pushing somebody or hitting somebody. And I think right now in the schools, kids are walking around with a lot of kind of stress and anger related to remote learning and a whole lot of stuff, and they don't really know how to handle it. And that those kinds of eruptions are greater now than they are. But we have to look at those as opportunities then to kind of say, let's look at the impacts of that behavior. And first, you're going to intervene with that, right? I mean, if you can, it's like, no, you are not going to push so-and-so or punch so-and-so. So stop. And then, okay, what's going on? What are you feeling? Let's identify that feeling. And then let's talk about kind of what you can do instead of, and why would you do something instead? Because then if you thought through the advantages and disadvantages in that, you're going to lose friends, you're going to be in trouble, you're going to be suspended. I mean, you're going to feel bad about yourself. People are going to be mad at you. Advantages of, taking a time out in that. And then you also need to realize before, like I said, like, does the child really know how to do the behavior that you're asking them to do and expecting them to do, or do they need to be taught and have it modeled for them and get some more supports? So I think that this model fits for them. And I think sometimes kids who tend to be really impulsive, they need more practice with this. And again, it's not that you hand over everything to them, but you strategically think about where can you build in more choices, more opportunity to practice being skillful about making the choice that's the best.
Right. The one thing I would add to that, going back to what I said just a minute ago, is let's say your kid is really emotional, so they hit, right? That's not the time to go through the advantages, disadvantages, all of that. At that, like Kristie said, stop right now. Is there, what are you feeling? And maybe that's all you get to in that moment, because you have to let them process that emotion first. Otherwise,
bring the safety, part of the brain. Bring the safety.
Yes.
Allow for the processing, and then come back to that, check for skills that are needed, and then look through that, just, go through that decision-making model.
Yeah. And it might be 5 minutes later. It might be 5 hours later. Your kid's better than anybody. So you have to just kind of keep that in mind. Okay. So we are out of time. Great conversation, of course. I am going to ask, first of all, if anybody has any questions, here's all the ways you can get in touch with us. And then Bonnie's going to come on screen and talk about our next parent chat, which is going to be more of a fun one. It's going to be a really good one, I think. All right, Bonnie, you're up.
Yes, let me get my screen sharing going. Hi, everybody. So next up on Parent Chat, we are going to be looking at, and that's going to be Wednesday, December 8th. That's going to be our last one of the year. And let's see.
I don't know, Sheri might have to stop her screen
Yeah,
share.
I'm not able to share, but that's okay. I'll just tell you. It's going to be, it's called Soul Care for the Holidays. We're really excited. We're going to have life coach Nadia Arens, who's a licensed social worker, come. She's super positive, and we're going to talk about how to make time for you so that your family can have the best of you and not just what's left of you, and have a really soulful and meaningful holiday. So that's coming up Wednesday, December 8th, and then we'll be done for the year.
Excellent.
Right.
But we'll be coming back in January with a whole bunch of new and wonderful parent chats for you.
We are trying to figure out what those are. If you have any ideas ever, you can always let us know of what you're hoping to hear from us about, and we can either do this or we can find another speaker. So if you have anything off the top of your head, you can put that in the chat box. And before you hop off tonight, if you can just tell us one takeaway from tonight, maybe something you can try, do differently, or something that resonated with you, that would be very helpful. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. Appreciate it.
Mhm.